All right, guys, so in this video, we're going to talk about a topic that people reach out to me and say, I'm not achieving what I want. I set the bar this high, and when I don't reach that, I feel like I failed. And it affects them when they're studying for an exam. It affects them how they study the rest of that day, the rest of that week, and it makes them feel, as though they're not going to reach their ultimate goal, which is to pass the exam or get into residency or whatever it might be. So there's really three things that I would say to focus in on when you set these goals and when you're studying for an exam. Kind of keep these three ideas in mind. And number one is going to be, make sure you're assessing the right piece, the right tool. Because if your goal for this thing is to say, I need to achieve here, which is probably going to be pass the exam, then you're setting yourself up for failure, because it's going to leave so much room for negativity to kind of creep in. It's going to take on a life of its own. So, and I stressed this before, is you need to be measuring the process. And what I mean by that is, the process is how you're preparing for that ultimate goal. Is I can measure how many questions that I do per day. I can measure the comprehension of those questions. I can measure how much I'm going back and reviewing the old material, and I can have those goals that are set up through the day, and so I can kind of measure myself ongoing, and that can be successful, because as you're checking those boxes off, and you're just like, all right, I'm making progress toward my goal, because ultimately, like we've always said, as long as you can honestly tell yourself that I'm better today than I was yesterday, you're moving in the right direction. And if you can win those small battles, and again, I'm just a big proponent. Let's not try to win the war all at once, guys. If we can win these small battles, the end result's gonna take care of itself. So I'd always say, rule number one is make sure you're assessing the right piece, and it's going to give you a little kind of a calmness, a peace of mind, that it's not going to seem insurmountable, because I'm just a big believer that if you can win the day, ultimately you can put a lot of those little victories together, and you can have a positive outcome, and you won't lose your mind in the process. Tip number two is going to be to honestly assess where you're at. Now, most exams out there that we have some type of assessment piece, and as I tell you, if you're going to the USMLE exam, is don't use the Q banks as an assessment piece. Use the Q banks for information. Your assessment piece in that situation, in my personal opinion, should be the NBMEs. They're the makers, or they're the writers of the actual exam itself to begin with. So, because I can tell you, and I'll see if I can find a copy of my NBMEs, is you got to assess where you're at. And I remember when I first started this journey, and I'm the second career kind of guy from this. I was a school teacher, and then I went into medicine, and of course, what I thought was a hard exam in say teaching or whatnot, compared to the USMLE, it's night and day. So I'm gonna see if I can find the results of my first NBME. I used to show these to my students when I did in-person teaching, and I can show you. And if they're on the screen right now, you'll see a picture of it, to where my first one, I remember taking it like it was yesterday. I was sitting in my ugly apartment, and I literally started taking that exam and thinking, oh my God, I know nothing. Like, I must have been, somebody gave me the wrong book to study here. I'm obviously in the wrong class, because, I just didn't know any of it. And you can see, I eventually just quit taking the exam, and my score on that first one is embarrassingly low. But I can tell you, I didn't quit. And I'm going to stress this, guys. There's no such thing as quitting during this process. If you have a setback, I don't care what the setback is. I've seen them all, and I've experienced most of them myself. That's just a step back. There's a blessing in disguise somewhere in there. It may not seem like it at the moment, but there most likely is one. Excuse me. And again, those NBMEs. And so what I did was, I was like, all right, number one, I'm not studying the right material. Number two, the advisor that I had saying to study this kind of stuff was wrong. And so then I kind of reached out and started talking to people who were successful in what they did. and that got me into the right material. And as you can see, and if I have these NBME scores to show you, you can see where I kind of went up. Now, I wasn't scoring 250 on these NBMEs. Excuse me. Eventually, I got to the point to where I could, I could pass. And once I got to the point where I could pass, guys, I took the exam, and the rest is history. But you can see I started from way down here, and I made it. But it was mainly I just had to have a real a coming to Jesus meeting with myself about where am I really at. There's a lot of false hope out there, and that's not what I'm about. And I realized I needed help. I needed new material. I had to reshuffle the deck, and then I just attacked moving this direction. It didn't work out in this direction, so it's cool. It's fine. We're just going to go in a different direction, but we're going to keep moving forward. And I promise you, if you put in the effort, have the right mindset with it, everything happens for a reason. And sometimes those delays, and I don't care if it's a fail, I don't care if it's just a delay because you're not ready for the test. And from my story, I remember, my school was one of those. It was a cash as you go, and I told the story before, but I remember I was outside. I got an email from my school. I was hoping to apply for residency that cycle, and my school said, you owe this much money before we'll give you the dean's letter, because the dean's letter, completes your application to the MASH or ECFMG. So they said, we need the cash because that's who we are, and I understand it's business, nothing personal, it's business. But it delayed me. I couldn't apply in July or August because I didn't have the money. I didn't have that money to pay off everything to at that point to get that dean's letter. Was I upset? Yes. Was it a stomach punch? Absolutely. But what it did, here's what that actually did. It delayed my application to where if you watch that video from IMG to Chief Resident, I talk about what happened in that situation or how I got it paid for. But instead of applying in August or September, where my application would have probably been buried in the thousands, I applied in December, which is unheard of, right? It's unheard of. But that delay of really figuring out where I was at in assessment and all that kind of stuff, but it's that delay that I felt was, at the time, was like, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. But that delay pushed me to applying in December. I did the whole thing where I emailed the program directors on Christmas Day intentionally, and I got interviews. And I might be the only person in history that I know of that I've ever heard is, I didn't apply to match until December, and I got interviews in January, and I matched. Became Chief Resident, the whole 9 yards. But it all started from a circumstance of it sure as heck didn't feel like things were moving in the right direction, and that hope was lost. But I can just tell you from my own experience, and I challenge you that when you get put in a spot like that, take a step back and know that it's probably all for the best. There's meaning and purpose behind it, and I honestly believe that wholeheartedly. And the third tip for this journey about maybe setting goals, not making them, and how you feel like it destroys you, is just to remember is this isn't about, a lot of times people we struggle. We struggle because we sometimes compare ourselves to others, friends or people that we feel we know. But this journey or anything in this whole process, this is really again, it's a you versus you. And once you can really kind of comprehend that and get rid of the external factors, it takes a lot of pressure off, because what are we worried about, honestly? You fail or it doesn't happen on the time frame that you want, doesn't mean the journey's over. You just got to regroup, and that's the part I really enjoy about this process. But it's really about again, you versus you. But if I asked you, I said, if you were struggling and I asked you, why? Why does it hurt? You might give me an answer, and then I'll have to ask why again, and eventually after about 5 or 6 whys, you get down to the root cause of it, and you feel like you're not good enough. There's usually perhaps a shame factor somewhere in there. But I can tell you that when you get to the other side of that, those things just they don't matter. Okay, I know when the people that care about you will care about you no matter what, no matter what the outcome. And so I just say I would just challenge you to keep in mind, get rid of the external factors in this whole process. There's a core people that care about you, and they're going to be there. They're going to be there with you through thick and thin, and that's all that matters. When I started this process, I tell you, my circle of people came down to maybe one or two. I got rid of a lot of the external influences who were probably more negative, and stuck around to people who just, number one, they probably care about me whether I went through this process successfully or not. But I wanted to, and I finally got to the point where I didn't want to do it for someone else. I was doing it for me. So, when I would challenge myself every day to meet those goals and expectations, because this is what I wanted. This is what I felt deeply that I was meant to do. And again, anything that I perceived as a negative influence or a distractor or just a bad outcome was really just kind of realigning me. I mean, it was pushing me in the right direction to meet the right person at the right time. And it sure as heck didn't feel like that, going through the process. But like they say, it's when you look backwards, all those dots, they can start to really look like a straight line after all. So those are my 3 tips, guys. Don't get discouraged. You're not alone. You won't be the first person to say that, I set the bar high, didn't achieve it, and I feel bad about myself. But just, again, keep in mind that if you can do these tips, you can reduce that bit of stress and leave more room for, it just allows more space for you to really focus on the more important things that you're going through. So anyways, guys, hope this was helpful. And as always, keep moving forward.